Okay, everyone, thank you so much for joining us for our final session of the day on Inkwell Beach. I'd like to introduce our incredible panelists, Tish from Unilever, AC, and Cheryl. Please welcome them to the stage.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tish Archie Oliver, and I serve as the Chief Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging Officer for Unilever North America. Today, I have the privilege of being joined by two esteemed guests, my colleague Cheryl Deja, who is the founder and CEO of Bridge, and AC Eggleston Bracey, the president of Unilever US and CEO of the Personal Care Division of Unilever North America. Given the critical role that brands play in influencing cultural change, there is a heightened awareness and motivation among business leaders to expand opportunities to advance diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging in their organization, and most importantly, in the marketplace. Bridge, the first independent DEI trade group for the global marketing industry, recently conducted an independent research study led by an academic team from Emory University, Indiana University, and the University of Georgia. The research studied marketing inclusion on social media platforms across multiple dimensions, including race, body, hair type, ability, and other dimensions of diversity across the top 200 brands. I want everyone to please listen up to this startling output. The study revealed that representation is generally an alarming 23 years behind the US Census Report 2020. However, there are some brands paving the way, and I'm elated to share that Dove was one of them. Dove was identified as the most inclusive brand across many dimensions of diversity and stood out specifically in the race and body type categories. As part of this multi-pronged research program, Bridge also uncovered 72 business practices across 5 dimensions of diversity on what it will take to build a truly inclusive company brand. These insights informed an assessment tool which will help companies identify their own uniquely maturity level of inclusion practices, as well as determine specific actions to help accelerate their company's progress to building an inclusive workplace, workforce, and marketplace, ultimately to drive business growth. This session specifically will discuss how we unite to redesign a more inclusive marketing approach that rethinks research, how we think with our agency partners, how we plan and buy media, our approach to product development, and so much more. With that being said, I'm going to turn it over to you, Cheryl, because I would love for the audience to hear about the research and, most importantly, the findings. I think as culture creators, everyone wants to know what needs to actually be done in order to build an inclusive brand.
Thanks, Tish. Okay, so I'm going to try and do this sitting down, although I'm very used to kind of like walking across stages. But I'm going to stay where I am. So thank you for having us, by the way, Adrian and everyone here. So just a little bit about Bridge. As Tish said, we are the first independent DE&I trade group for the global marketing industry. This is our board. Tish obviously is one of our board members. We launched in April of 2022. So we're just a little over a year old, and I'm really excited to share all the work that we've done in just 1 year and invite everyone, quite frankly, to join us. So fundamentally, our approach, and it's been interesting because I've been watching a lot of DE&I panels and sessions over the last few days, and every one of them I feel like I just want to jump on stage. So I'm really happy that I'm able to do it here. But our whole approach is to move the narrative of DE&I away from philosophy to inclusion as a business practice. How do we operationalize inclusion across the organization? And we're going to talk a little bit about our approach, but we have a very specific framework that will help every company. It doesn't matter who you are, what kind of company you are, what you sell, and the same principles apply. So So I think really importantly, and it was interesting because there was a question here yesterday, and somebody asked the question, how do you make DE&I not the job just of the Chief Diversity Officer, but of everyone? That was one of the times that I wanted to jump up on the stage, by the way. And so fundamentally, we believe that you have to move DE&I as a dependency on a function, beliefs, or opinions, and move it to dependent on practices, policies, and processes. And until we do that, until we get that right, we're going to continue to have these conversations. So Bridge is committed to not doing the conversation thing, but actually doing the action piece. Okay, so as Tish said, we conducted the Inclusive Brand Project with a number of academic partners. And we were very focused on the marketplace. And the reason why we focused on the marketplace was because we knew that there would be dependencies on the workplace. And there's not a lot of academic rigor that's been put against exploring equities and inequities in the marketplace. So we felt like it was a really important place for us to focus. We did a combination of literature review of what's out there. And then we also did a number of interviews with, probably about 50 interviews with CMOs, CDOs and CEOs to really understand what the business practices were that were contributing either to equities or inequities in the marketplace. And really what we wanted to understand was what is brand inclusion, why does it matter, how are we doing, most importantly, and then how do we get better. And so this is the working definition that we're currently using based on the research that we have and that we did, which is that a brand that serves underrepresented communities through market offerings and actions that enhance the consumer's perceptions of acceptance, belonging, equity, and respect. That is how we think of an inclusive brand. That is what our definition is. Why does it matter, right? So there's obviously a moral case and a business case. Now, I think we've all been pushing the moral case for a long time, and it's just now, there's $5 trillion in buying power if you look at the Black American, Hispanic American, Asian American, Indigenous American marketplace, right? So it's a cautionary tale for brands who are not focused on how are they leveraging and tapping into that. So yes, there's always a moral case, but if you cannot get behind it from a moral perspective, then you certainly need to get behind it from a business perspective. Here comes the interesting stuff. How are we doing on inclusion? So one of the approaches that we took was we wanted to understand, when we look at the social media across the top 200 brands over 5 years, where we are and where we've been, in terms of representation in our social media and in our marketing for the top brands. Now, our goal is to do the top 200 brands across 5 years, but we currently have the analysis of the top 50 brands across 2 years. And we looked at it against skin type, so the Fitzpatrick scale shows us skin tones, body type, hair type, and differences in ability. And this is where it was pretty alarming. Okay, so if you look at the orange boxes, that's where the dominant representation is, right? So probably not that alarming to everyone here, but certainly not good enough, right? So if you look at every industry, it really does skew towards, I guess that's the left of the screen. And then you go, the darker the skin tones, right, the lower the percentages. The same rings true if you look at body type, hair type, and ability. In fact, if you look at ability, differences in ability, you are literally not represented at all in most of the social media marketing. Hair type is similar, body type is the same thing. So we decided to understand where we are in terms of racial diversity based on the U.S. Census. So there's a thing which I've learned, and I, quite frankly, have been learning a lot through this process, called the Simpsons Index of Population Diversity. And basically what that allows us to do is look at the population and figure out what the racial diversity is for example, or other ways to kind of like index the population. According to the 2020 US Census, we are at 61% racial diversity. That's the racial diversity index. In 2000, the racial diversity index was at 41%, okay? So now, remember, we just did this analysis, and this is where we are. I'm gonna let that sit for a second. Okay, so you can see that there are three brands that are either at the 61% racial diversity index or a little bit above it, and then it really drops pretty drastically, and a lot of the brands are even below 41% of the racial diversity index. Now, I'm happy to say, who's sitting at the top? Dove. So the top brand is Dove, okay? And they are above the racial diversity index based on this analysis. Now, why is this important, right? It's important because we are 23 years behind, and I hear a lot from CMOs that we're making progress. Well, we're not making progress fast enough, and we're not doing enough to jump ahead, because if we keep going at this rate, we know that the racial diversity index is just increasing, right? So if you kind of even do a forward-looking perspective, we will soon be more than 23 years behind if we don't start to accelerate much faster. So how do we get better? So we have created a maturity inclusion model that really helps companies understand where they are against a maturity level. And as Tish said, we've uncovered 72 business practices that will allow you to figure out where you are on that spectrum, and then where do you need to go. And these are the companies that were involved in some of the interviews that we did. And we're also now doing a pilot program with Campbell's, Sephora, Condé Nast, Lululemon, and a number of other brands actually are involved at this point. So these are the 72 business practices across 5 dimensions. If you look at it, there's 2 that sit in the workplace, and there's 3 that sit in the marketplace. And in the workplace, it's very specifically focused on organization practices and marketing management practices. And then if you look at the marketplace, you're looking at commercial practices, communication practices, and advocacy practices. Now, I have heard a lot of, like literally every day, oh my gosh, but we don't want to be Bud Light. Like, how do we not become Bud Light, right? So we have 65 business practices for every brand that you don't even have to think about a social cause at that moment in time. Not every company is ready for advocacy, right? But this gets every company ready for that. And so when we hear the salacious headlines and, et cetera, we really need to stop and think for a second and say, okay, was that company ready for it? What else could they be doing to build an inclusive brand that doesn't even engage at that level? So this is what a maturity model could potentially look like. And this is not reflective of any one company. It's just to illustrate, if you go through the assessment process, what you're going to see, okay? And then it also shows 70% would be an actual mature company, a mature brand, all right? So this will help us identify where the gaps are very specifically. So here, for example, let's just say, it's pretty good against organization. This is actually an aggregate of 3 brands that we've done some work on, okay? None of them are getting to that 70% yet. And these are brands that you would kind of go, okay, they're doing a pretty good job. It's not reflective of Unilever, by the way. So it allows us to understand where companies are on this maturity model spectrum, and then what are the business capabilities that you need in order to bridge those gaps. So I could spend a lot of time showing more research and more of the actual specifics of the 72 business practices, but I know Tish wants to get to her question, so I'm not going to do that. But what does this mean, right? So there's some progress, but a lot more is needed. You need to define the goal of inclusion for your own brand. It's really important to understand who you are and who you're not. And then go after that, right? Really understand who you are and who you are not, and then go after that. And then, we have ways to really obviously design a much more inclusive marketing approach, a more inclusive product development approach, a more inclusive workplace approach. And those are the fun things that we're going to start doing in terms of building best practices. But this gives us a place to start and a framework to work against. Okay, sorry, I know I went pretty fast, but I'm going to keep quiet now and turn it over to Tish.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Cheryl. That information, yes, please, let's give it up for Cheryl. I think that information was extremely helpful to hear because it actually provides a lot of context for this conversation. And it is startling to hear that there's a 23-year gap, quite honestly. AC, at Unilever, we believe that businesses with purpose grow, companies with purpose last, people with purpose thrive. And Unilever is a purpose-driven organization. Can you talk a little bit about how purpose comes to life at Unilever?
Yeah, first of all, Cheryl, that was excellent. So really, really good insights. It's actually the first time that I'm seeing the assessment, and I think so much of what you say resonates really well, and it can lead to a really good conversation. But in terms of what does it mean to be a purpose-driven company, I think purpose has gotten a bad rap. There's a label that's put on purpose that makes it seem fluffy, and it really isn't that. I think being purposeful is about being intentional, and it's about being intentional on the impact that you want to have with your company and what you want to have with the brand. And when you're a consumer goods company, you think about how you are intentional for the consumers that you serve, but it's also about being intentional beyond the moment of consumption, but being intentional about other needs they have in their lives that you can help with. And this area of inclusion is one of them. So being purposeful, to me, is about that. What we talk about in terms of being purposeful is we also have an intention to, as a company, to make sustainable living commonplace. And that really means giving people access to more in their lives, is really what that means. And using our products is helping you do that. So that's two ways to look at what being purposeful means for the company.
Thank you. Thank you, AC. Thank you. Cheryl, I have the honor and privilege of sitting on the board of Bridge. And I get the opportunity to see the uniqueness in the convergence of chief diversity officers and chief marketing officers come together to kind of crack this nut in terms of what inclusion means and permeating it through the entire organization. And we talk about it from a holistic approach. It's multifactorial: workforce, workplace, marketplace. Can you talk a little bit about Bridge and why you started Bridge?
Okay. You sound like Deirdre. Tell your story, she always says to me. That's Deirdre Smalls-Lander. I'm sure all of you know her. So I was born in South Africa. I lived under the apartheid regime there, and I knew very early on what inequity looked like. And so I think that spurred my commitment to social justice. It wasn't easy being an activist in South Africa. You literally disappeared. I actually know people that I never saw again. And when I got here, I thought that I was going to see a different sense of freedom for everyone. And it was quite alarming that while in South Africa it was the law, here it was the practice. And so that, was kind of eye-opening for me, just coming from where I came. I also am part of a multiracial family, so it's very personal. I see the world through my son's eyes, and I don't see the world through my eyes anymore. I very, very specifically see the world through his eyes, and I'm just committed to changing it. So there's no kind of compromise in that for me. On the professional side, I have seen, so I was the Chief Strategy Officer at the MMA, I worked at the IAB, it's the Mobile Marketing Association, for those that might not know, the Interactive Advertising Bureau, and I saw the power of what can happen when you bring an industry together and you collaborate to build something, right? So in those cases, we built the internet. I mean, we created a platform that was viable for marketers. Mobile was the same thing. We created a platform that was viable for marketers. So there is no reason that we cannot do the same thing for DE&I. And so Bridge was born as a result of that. I figured that that model of bringing an industry together, of galvanizing an industry, can prove to be as powerful when we're driving change, and we need to accelerate that change. And the only way to accelerate that change is the collection of all of us, right? It's just not going to happen. With all due respect to all the chief diversity officers who work incredibly, incredibly hard, it's just not going to happen one person at a time. And so we're going to bring everyone together. And then to your point of the marketers and the diversity leaders and the business leaders, to the first point, we fundamentally believe that the change needs to happen at that convergence point. And so every time I talk to a CMO, I ask them, how often do you talk to your chief diversity officer? How often do you spend time with your chief diversity officer? Because if you're not doing it on a regular basis, if you're not sitting with them on a regular basis, there's no way that you've made a commitment to DE&I. And so that's part of what we're trying to do. We're trying to bring the industry together and the functional areas together, because as we said, it's not the job of a chief diversity officer to fix this.
That's such a great point. You know, for us at Unilever, that's also our philosophy too. Specifically, we're on a journey towards equity and inclusion, and when we talk about equity at Unilever, we talk about it from all four corners. So we talk about it from a talent equity, brand equity, community equity, and a supplier diversity equity perspective. So it's really good to hear your perspective on that, and that being behind some of the context of why you decided to start Bridge. AC, inclusion is so critical for any brand that wants to be able to provide resources and services for their consumers today, but most importantly for any organization as they think about future fitting their business to be able to provide for the future consumer, especially considering the changing demographic composition in the United States, because the context that we're talking about specifically is within the US. As you think about our approach and our methodologies at Unilever, what's some advice that you can actually give to some of our attendees that are in these roles where they're responsible for ensuring that inclusion is penetrating the brands that they support?
Yeah, I thought what Cheryl shared was really good, and I don't know if we can go back to that slide. It was your last slide on the next steps. And then the slide before that talked about the practices. I thought, again, it was really helpful. So one, I wouldn't underestimate people, because our organizations are made up of people, and people do the work. And so it's really, really important to start your inclusion and your purposeful agenda with people of purpose and inclusive perspectives in the room. So I think about me, why I joined Unilever is because it was a company of purpose. You know, I'd spent 25 plus years driving profit for companies, and I wanted to drive impact, which was beyond the profit for the organization, but to make a real impact in the community through business and in turn drive business. And so we look for people who are also purposeful. So everyone that comes into Unilever, they do a purpose workshop. So it's not surprising when you meet people, they say, hi, my name is AC and my purpose is. When I first joined, I thought that was the most bizarre thing. Like, I don't know you like that. Why are you telling me your purpose? But it's just, so people with purpose, I think, are really important to have brands with purpose is one. And then second, it was in your last slide, which is get clear on what your purposeful or inclusive objective is for your brand. And we have so many different brands. A brand like Dove, inclusion is a part of its point of difference. You know, we're in a mission to have people experience themselves as beautiful, every single person. And I'll shorthand that as beauty inclusivity. That is our point of difference in the marketplace. If you think about the campaign for Real Beauty, that's, you know, how Dove made its name. That's our life's work. It is inclusion at its deepest sense, so everyone feels included. Not every brand has that as its core mission, but it has to have it as a part of its business model in some way. So it's really important first to be very intentional about what that looks like. You know, we have our brand Shea Moisture is all about serving underrepresented people with textured hair. It's about over-serving in terms of the hair needs, but making sure we have a positive impact in creating more Black women entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs of color. Those are more inclusive missions. But there are other brands, like our brand Axe, that is all about smelling irresistible. That is not necessarily an inclusive mission, but we want to make sure all people have the experience of smelling irresistible and showing attraction. No, really, truly. And all types of attraction, all forms of attraction. Same gender attraction, no stereotyping of attraction. But it's not our mission. You see the difference I make? The difference between those two? So they both have to be inclusive and purposeful, but it doesn't have the same role in every brand. So you have to be really, really clear. And that was on your slide, right? That was your second point, which is be clear in that purposeful objective. Then the other thing is not just say you have to do, because consumers today, people today are savvy. So it's not like you want to have a facade of inclusion, but you're not really being inclusive, right? So you need that authenticity. So the question is, how do you do that? You have to practice what you preach. Or in fact, you only preach what you practice. Because so often we say something, but we don't do it. So we really try to make sure brands like Dove, brands like Axe, all the brands I've talked about, that, I'll use Axe for instance, we make sure our fragrances are tested among a variety of people. Right? A brand like Degree is all about movement and making sure everyone has the confidence to move. Within that, we show people with physical challenges and disabilities, and we test our products on people with physical challenges and disabilities. That way you get the authenticity. So those are a few examples.
That's great. Thank you so much, AC, for that really comprehensive answer.
Can I add something to that comment?
Absolutely.
Sorry, can I?
No,
Okay.
please.
I love what you just said, because one of the things that we have seen is that you can have diversity without inclusion, right? So, for example, right, you could have an ad that shows somebody who's not abled using a product, but if you haven't tested that product for that person, you've got diversity without inclusion, right? And so what you're saying is really a true sense of having of inclusion, right?
Yeah, inclusion, and as I mentioned before, even belonging. And if I use Degree as an example, because of that, we have stick deodorants that are prevalent in the United States. And we find people with physical challenges, it's hard for them to take the top off the deodorant. So we
Right.
actually came up with implements and tools so you can attach them to the deodorant, 4 different types, depending on your physical challenges, that you actually have access. So I think that point is really important, that it's not tokenism, that's
Yeah.
the watch out,
Yeah.
which is the pretense of diversity, but not truly authentic inclusion and belonging.
Yeah. No, I love that. Sorry.
No, I was just, so thank you also, AC, for clarifying that point. And I think that's super important. And we don't necessarily always talk about it from this aspect, but I do believe that this entrepreneurial spirit that we have at Unilever and allowing people to fulfill and live through their purpose is one of the things that's very unique about Unilever, and giving space for people to create. And so this point that you're making just now about the deodorant is really important, right? Because we also take into consideration the perspective and the value of the people in our organization, valuing in that, leveraging that in order to actually help us drive business growth. So thank you so much, AC, for that point. Cheryl, Bridge has launched this program. You get the opportunity to work with a number of different organizations. And as you think about this maturity assessment, I want you to think about what the assessment revealed. And I don't know if you had a chance to look at it by organization or if you looked at the information in aggregate, but if you did it by organization, did you identify any consistent gaps across the board? And if so, are there any recommendations in terms of the gaps that you identified?
So we're early days. I'll just put that out there. But we definitely are starting to see some consistencies across organizations. And I'm hoping that we continue to, obviously, it's not feasible that we would build best practices for 72, well, maybe not today, for 72 business practices, although hopefully in the future we might get there. But we do need to be able to build best practices and help companies build capabilities for some of the ones that are clearly obvious. So on the workplace side, I would say, talent acquisition and retention is coming up as what looks like a real gap. I don't think that's necessarily surprising. In the workplace, inclusive media buying is a huge issue. We hear that over and over and over again. We must, I think, start to look at the structures against which we're doing media buying, and start to break down those walls and start to break down those structures, because if we don't rethink those structures, we're just building on structures that are already inequitable, right? And so we have to, in order for us to fix those quite frankly, any issue, any business practice, we need to look at the structure and we need to kind of like start to break that down. It is very hard up here. So we're actually going to announce pretty soon, and I think that's the beauty, back to the point of when you're an industry trade group and you can collaborate, we have the opportunity to fix, not talk, right? And we're very just oriented to action. That's just who I am. So we are going to announce very soon an inclusive media buying steering committee, and we're going to unpack what is wrong, finally, and we're going to start to fix it. And I'll tell you what's interesting, and AC, I'd be interested even your perspective here. But so I've worked on the internet. I've worked in the mobile industry, and I remember having conversations with CMOs, and I said, okay, but all your like all of your audience is here, right? And all of your media spend is over there. So why are you not spending it over here? And I would get the answer, well, it's not part of our marketing mix models, and we really need to kind of like figure that out, and we don't have an attribution against mobile, and all of that, right? So I kind of feel like we're a little bit in the same place with DE&I and allocations to underrepresented communities, underrepresented media companies, which is let's figure out what the attribution model is, right? Let's actually know how your money is working for you, because marketers are generally tried and true, and until we say to them, this is the ROI on your dollar that you're spending against this media, maybe that's what we need to do. And it's, for me, it's very similar, right? Like it's a similar thing. So the inclusive media strategy is a big one. And I think the product development is another big hole. And, again, I come back to what AC said, because I love the idea that you understood that it was hard to take a cap off, right? And so you fixed it, right? It's kind of the Tristan Walker story, right? He started Bevel because he walked down the aisles and he couldn't find a really great razor that was a single blade razor for his skin. So he started Bevel, right? And so if companies don't start to think in that way, I think that's going to be, kind of challenging for them. But those are some of the current consistencies that we're seeing.
Well, let me ask you a question. That was really helpful to hear. Are you seeing organizations with a capability gap to be able to actually execute?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is really the big issue, right? That we can sit here and we can talk about where companies are on the maturity model, but if we don't help them build the capabilities to bridge those gaps, then we haven't done our job. So Bridge is really committing to building the best practices, to building the capabilities, because if the capabilities exist, we wouldn't have the gaps, right? So yeah, there is definitely a hole in capabilities. And, I would say, and listen, I'm not going to assume anything with Unilever, but even within, big CPG companies, you might have some brands that are doing it really well, but other brands that haven't quite caught up yet. And so we need to figure out how do we use the best practices from a set of brands, make them low-hanging fruit, to then translate that into other brands, right? So.
That's a really good segue to my next question. So AC, you think about an organization like Unilever with over 400 brands. Dove has been ranked top brand in terms of inclusion. What's your perspective around kind of mobilizing other brands in the portfolio, helping them to understand purpose and brand inclusion?
Yeah, I think it's similar to what we talked about. Unilever doesn't start with Dove, it starts with the company's purpose. And then each brand looks at the role that purpose and inclusion plays. And I think it's really important. And I keep referencing, you have a slide that is like your second to the last, or they're not letting you go for it? You had something that talked about the 4 levers that it's okay. You can speak to it. I think we have to watch out for what works for one brand and assume it's going to work for another. Because each of the brands play a different role.
Can you go to the front slide? I know. I want to go to the second last slide.
wants to back up, if you don't mind? That it's
Second last.
probably the second or third from the last.
Sorry, AC, I'm like talking over you.
That's okay. Well, the point that I'm making, your question was, how do you manage a portfolio and what can you learn from a brand like Dove? I think there are a lot of insights to learn because I think Dove is firing on all those cylinders. That's not the one. It's coming. Keep going. Again. He's in the beginning. It's at the end. Where's the beginning? Yeah, it's your practices. One, back up one.
Oh, no. I can't.
Well, let's not worry about slides.
Can you back up one?
One.
So you see all these different practices. I think that's very helpful. You've got the workplace practices and you have the marketplace practices. These are really useful. And if you think about Dove, you have all of these. From an advocacy practice perspective, we ask people to take action and we advocate for change. We have legislative change that we advocate through the Crown Act. We're also advocating for Kids Online Safety Act, which is helping because kids disproportionately are impacted with negative images on social media, and it impacts their self-esteem and well-being. So we advocate for that. We play an active role in advocating for social change and progress. Communication practices, proactively managing how the brand shows up in the market. Very, very thoughtful and intentional around disrupting narrow stereotypes of beauty that don't serve us. And the brand intentionally does that. Commercial practices, creating offerings that serve needs of consumers beyond the mainstream market. We look for opportunities to offer more care. So I won't go through all of it, but I think it's a really helpful practice. And I think for your brand, depending on your intention, you can figure out which of these are right for you to adopt. Dove is also a $5 billion business. So not every brand is $5 billion or 5 billion euro. So you also have to look at what your investment capacity is in your brand based on its size and what you can afford to invest in. So I think this is a nice, if you will, a smorgasbord, a buffet of tools that you can use. If you have more capacity, you can fire on all of those cylinders. If you have less, which ones will create the biggest difference that is bespoke to your brand's purpose or inclusivity objective? So again, I think the answer is here, and you use Dove as an example of one that's done that and is actually scoring highest on your measurement.
Thank you, AC. Cheryl, so we've heard from one leader in terms of the feedback and thoughts around the assessment and the work and how this is coming to life at Dove or Unilever specifically. As you're providing the feedback to these organizations with regards to their assessment and most importantly, their level of maturity, what's been their reaction? Are they receiving this well? Next steps? Share some of that with us.
It's a great question actually. So without sharing the brands, because it's all proprietary, we don't share where the maturity is for any brand. We're not here to call anyone out, right? Like our goal is to help, right? That's it. We're here to provide information and then to help them get to where they need to go. So we did one assessment. I think it's important to know you can do this assessment against the company, or you can do the assessment against a brand. So a company like Unilever, right, to do it against the company is probably a big ask, right? So one company, again, not Unilever, one company, we did it against two brands, and they were intentional about the two brands that they chose. And they were very, very different maturity models for each one of their brands. So they came back to us and said, okay, how can you now help us as an organization to identify where we're doing things right and to start putting those practices in place organization-wide, and then to start to kind of prioritize. And I think it's, to AC's point, not every company is going to be able to do everything right away. And that's actually not the intention. The intention is to, again, understand where you are and where you need to go. And it can be 5 years, 7 years, whatever the plan is. But there needs to be an active commitment to saying, okay, we're going to go through a process. We're going to prioritize where our gaps are, and we're going to figure out where we think we can make the most impact and start to attack it each either each, kind of grouping or a specific business practice, right? So in that case, we're now working with them to figure out where are their priorities, where's the low-hanging fruit to make impact, and then where's the long-term goal. On the other hand, we've done it at a company level, and I would say that it was a company that one would think is doing really well, and they were pretty high, but they uncovered issues that they would not have known had they not done the assessment. Because when you do the assessment, just to kind of help maybe illustrate, you're asking for people across the organization that are fluent in these practices. So not everyone, right? So Tish, you would do, right, maybe the workplace and the organization. You'd have your CMOs and your marketing people would do a certain section. Your product development people would do another section, right? So it's a cross-functional assessment. When you do that, when you get that kind of input, you hear things that you didn't know, right? And so even companies that are doing it well, they revealed that they found new information. And so now they're thinking about, okay, well, what do they now need to do against it? So far, all of the companies that have done it have said, okay, now what's next? And I do think that there is a process that we'll go through with companies that will say, how are you prepared for which parts of this? Let us help you get prepared for more. It's like a readiness piece, right? And then there's also an accountability piece. How are you measuring and tracking? And that's another piece of what will start to impact. So it's really fundamentally a framework. We're not looking to kind of say, here's where you are, okay, see ya. We're saying, here's where you are, and now this is what you need to do to get to the next step.
Yeah. I think that's really interesting because I think a lot of organizations or consulting firms that actually provide this service, they normally do it from a workplace perspective, right? So it's normally around talent, and these organizations are helping these consultancies are helping organizations understand where the inequities are in terms of people and culture. I think as we start to think about the research that Bridge has done, it allows an organization to look at that holistically, right? So us as an organization at Unilever, we prioritized some of this work from a talent perspective because we wanted to ensure that our 5-year diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging strategy was really rooted in the data from a talent perspective. And the conversation that we often have is, are we prioritizing inclusion from a people and a culture perspective, or is it more of a brand focus? And where we net it out, of course, is that it's holistic. And so that's what I think is really unique about this assessment that you have. Yeah, absolutely. We have a couple of minutes for questions from the audience. Are you up for questions?
Love it.
Yes? Perfect. Do we have any questions? Anyone have thoughts? Yes, please, and state your name. And I can actually.
Good afternoon. My question was about the profiles that employees were asked to fill out that you thought was kind of odd in the beginning. Do you find that hiring employees that have purpose and value in that purpose makes the company more purposeful? So does each employee add to the purpose quotient, and how does diversity play into that?
Yeah, it's interesting. And what I was sharing was once you're hired, you go through something called a purpose workshop. So you can raise your hand if you're interested to help you find out and articulate your personal purpose. As we interview people, so it's less of a profile, we also get a sense for if it's a person with purpose. And I do think they work together. People with purpose want to join companies with purpose. And when you have purposeful people, it helps your company be much more purposeful because your people use the company to fulfill their purpose. So the short answer is yes, and I think it works together.
I think that's a great answer, EC. And, talking about it from a new hire perspective is one element. I think the other element is that it also helps to be able to retain your talent in the organization as well. When people are able to realize their purpose and their passion in the organization, it contributes to your ability to feel like you belong or you're connected to the organization, which then ultimately helps the organization retain you as talent.
Hello, this has been really insightful. DE&I is going through a really interesting time, and there's always ebbs and flows. We know 3 years ago when George Floyd was murdered, there was a mass influx of investment in this space. We now, particularly if you look at the U.S. footprint, are seeing a lot of anti-LGBTQ plus bills. We're seeing affirmative action coming in under review with the Supreme Court, which could come down any day now, quite literally, which will impact the pipeline. Do you see this as a slight blip in the system? Do you think this is going to be devastating long term? Do you think that we'll be able to stay the course in DE&I? Do you think it'll change the name? I'm really trying to get your futuristic picture of where we go from here, because DE&I is quite literally under attack. You look at Florida, you look at Texas, you look at a lot of conservative states, they are looking to white programs. So just curious from that standpoint.
AC, Cheryl, do you want to take it first before I take it?
Yeah. So thank you for asking that question, because we think about that a lot, and there's absolutely no doubt that DE&I is under attack, and there are mischaracterizations about what DEI practices even are, and how it affects everyone. So I'm going to answer this in a couple of different ways if I can. One is, just because they have loud voices does not mean that they're going to win, because we're going to keep at it, and we're going to keep fighting, and we're going to make it happen. So, you know, we have grit, and maybe they don't have as much. They might have loud voices, but they might not have as much grit as we have. So that I can promise. The second thing is that I do think, and that this is why, from our perspective, we are changing the narrative from DE&I as a philosophy to operationalizing it as a business practice. And why are we doing that? Because we can argue for the rest of our lives about this being a philosophical conversation, and we will never get to agree. But if you ask any company, do you want to build an inclusive brand or an inclusive company? If they say no, they shouldn't be in business. And that's why we actually start with inclusion, because we believe that it's the more digestible, quite frankly, approach. But let's be clear, equity is the end result, okay? So yes, we are under attack. Affirmative action, I do think, is going to have a very big impact. But that just means that we're going to have to put in practices that make sure that we can funnel more talent into the industry, and we're going to have to be smarter about the way that we do it. And I think we're going to have to stop giving the opportunity of these, like, words and discussions, and, you know, kind of opportunities for conservatives to attack everything we say and do, right? But we need to stay focused on what we have to do, and not get distracted by what they're saying. And so, as I say, we've got the grit, and we're going to keep going.
Yeah. Just one thing, I love three things that you said, but I think I would really, we're politically under attack. We are not socially under attack. And I think at the end of the day, people win at the end of the day, because people really do want inclusion. People also want diversity. It's the politics that make us feel like people don't want it, and politics ebb and flow.
I agree, AC, and I think that businesses that get this will win ultimately, right? So I'll share what I think a lot of people already know. By 2040, we will be in the majority minority state. We know that the multicultural population is the fastest growing segment in the United States, multicultural being defined as Black, Hispanic, and Asian. Our Hispanic population is up 20+%. Our Asian population is up 35.5%. We know this, right? And businesses that get it understand this. And so the only way that we're going to actually be able to make progress in this space is for us to continue to work towards it. As an organization, we understand and we acknowledge that in the U.S. we have a 400-year-old problem that we're actually working against, a 400-year-old problem of isms, classism, racism, sexism. But as an organization, we understand that internally, that we can actually create a space for people in our organization to feel connected and belong, and provide people with the resources that they need in order to be very successful. We also understand that we can leverage our ecosystem to bring about good in society, not just for our consumers, but for the community at large. So to answer your question, AC, to buttress your point, you're right. Politically, I think there's a lot there, right? We're in a politically charged environment. Socially, this is a movement.
Hi, I'm Michael Clark. I'm wondering, Unilever takes on a lot of issues: body positivity, self-esteem, the Crown Act. It's obvious that you identify issues that service the body parts that, your products and services address. But what is the process internally on what types of issues that you take on? I'm sure it's a democratic process, but how do you identify, we want to take this on, we want to take that on? What is that process like?
As a company, Unilever is a company of brands, and then outside of the brands, we are a company. So we figure out what issues we want to take on based on the missions of the brands and the mission of the company. So you talked about the issues the company takes on. Those are actually the issues the brand Dove takes on, because the brand Dove is committed to, and the purpose of what I talked about earlier, beauty inclusivity. And it's a brand, we start first with what the brand has a right to take on. And we find that we can find what we have a right to take on based on what people associate us with, based on the product. So Dove came as a soap. So it came from something you use on your body, and out of that mission, there's body positivity. And then we also make products for hair and body, so we champion those areas. The brand Shea Moisture it's been a brand of Black women, and Black women are the center of the economic universe, particularly in the Black community, I should say. So enabling entrepreneurship among Black women enables financial viability among Black women. Those are examples of the brand. But as a company, we are committed to a number of things, and there are issues that we might take on, like voting inclusivity in the U.S. as a company based on what we're committed to. So I hope that helps. You look at the brand, then there's some macro ones that we think only at scale, they're important to diversity and inclusion or well-being that we'll take a stand on.
Can I just add to that point too, AC? And you said it before, because I think it's really important. At Unilever, our philosophy, our mission is to make sustainable living commonplace. And as a result, we have made some strategic choices and actions. And to contribute to a fair and socially inclusive world is one of those things. So I will tell you how I've seen this kind of materialize. I've only been with the organization for 2 years, but how I've seen this materialize, and the intentionality, because you talked about that, the intentionality that the leaders take when they think about a current event and its impact on its employees and society at large. So we saw Roe versus Wade overturned last year, right? 40% of our workforce lives in a place where abortion is illegal. And to ensure that people have equitable access to reproductive support, Unilever became a signatory of the Don't Ban Equality Coalition to support our employees, and to also join forces with other organizations wanting to provide support and resources, a human right to people in society. So I just wanted to provide that as an example of how equity comes to life, how Unilever keeps at the center its Unilever people and the community at large. Any other questions? Okay, well, before we leave, AC, do you have any parting words for our culture catalysts in the audience?
Just really thank you. Thank you for your generous listening. I know it's late. It's Thursday. It's almost 6 o'clock, and you guys are here and you showed up for such an important conversation around having brands with inclusivity and driving inclusivity, diversity, equity, and belonging, I will add, in our organizations and in our brands. So thank you.
Thank you, AC. And Cheryl, any parting words?
So I would say that this work is hard, and I am sure that that every day when these attacks happen, it might seem like we're going backwards, and it might seem like there's just no hope. But there is hope. We are going to change it. We are going to fix it, And, you know, we've just got to stay the course, right? Like, we've got to believe in what we believe, and then we've got to stay the course, and we've got to fix it. So know that there is an organization out there, and I mean this sincerely. If you need support at any time, just reach out. I'm Cheryl at wearebridge.com, SHERYL at wearebridge.com. That is why we are here. We're here to give you support. If you're having a terrible day and you've heard something in the news, reach out. Let's have conversations about it, and just know that you're not alone.
Cheryl, AC, thank you so much for this thought-provoking and enlightening conversation. Can we please give it up for Cheryl and AC? Thank you for joining us today.